All right. Welcome to Reparations Conversations, the Taylors Talk White Supremacy, Reparations, in the Church. Today we have a special guest with us, my friend, Mr. DeAndre Jones. DeAndre is a member of the Fayetteville City Council representing Ward 1. He's a social worker and longtime community advocate. So thank you for being with us, DeAndre.
Lowell, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for doing this work. This moves our community forward in so many ways. And this conversation, I call them crucial conversations, necessary conversations, conversations that make us feel uncomfortable. They take us out of our comfort zone. But as I mentioned earlier, they certainly move our community forward. So thank you for putting your life on the line as it relates to doing this work, because I know that race, anytime we have the conversation about race, people are become sensitive, and particularly the topic of white supremacy and reparations. So man, I appreciate you for making that sacrifice. Thank you, thank you.
It's kind of you, DeAndre. I appreciate that. So happy to have you with us today. And today we want to talk specifically about reparations of power. So in their book, Reparations, Quan and Thompson write that the effect of white supremacy is best understood as the threefold theft of truth, wealth, and power. So theft of power is achieved on two fronts, personal and political. By personal, we mean that the agency of Black people over their bodies has been suppressed by white supremacist systems such as mass incarceration. By political, we mean that the agency of Black people over the body politic has also been suppressed by white supremacist systems such as voter suppression. One effect of theft of power is the Black-white leadership gap. Black people are underrepresented in state and federal government. So Quan and Thompson write that to repair power, we must enable and submit to Black leadership. So DeAndre, I wanted to ask you if you can tell our audience how you're working to enable Black leadership or to lead as a Black man, and how people can support your work in our community.
Thank you for that. Well, I am familiar with each of those ideas that you shared. Personally, I've been impacted running for public office. When I ran for city council, I made myself vulnerable. My campaign message was people over politics. And with that being said, I realized that that would require me to be transparent. And so my transparency, I became transparent as it relates to my background. Lowell, of course, you know that I grew up in Northeast Arkansas, the Arkansas Delta. And those who are listening today, I'm pretty sure that you are at some point, you have become familiar or acquainted with the Arkansas Delta and the lack of resources. So growing up in Northeast Arkansas, growing up in the Delta, I've experienced lack of resources. And so and being a Black man. So I remember being arrested. I remember having to experiencing, and mine was a minor misdemeanor, but I remember how my life was impacted. I remember the background checks. I remember being denied opportunity because of my background. And I also remember other non-people of color with worse backgrounds, they committed far worse crimes. However, they didn't receive the same treatment. Personally, my mother, I remember my mother who worked as a city recorder, and she experienced some legal issues. And her life was turned upside down. She paid the price for the crime that she committed, absolutely. But however, there was a moment where she paid, a higher price for what she did, opposed to those individuals who are non-Black, who did what I described far worse, committed far, far worse acts. And so that impacted me. My entire family was impacted. The community is impacted the same way as it relates to the criminal justice system. We know that African Americans, that Black people, we receive far worse sentences than other groups. Does that mean that African Americans commit more crimes? No. It means that because due to racism, because of white supremacy, the consequences are far greater. And this is not just my experience, this can be proven. As it relates to police brutality, I'm very fortunate to have never experienced that personally. I'm very appreciative of the relationship that I've been able to forge, the genuine relationship that I've been able to forge with the Fayetteville Police Department. However, I'm not blind. Nationally, even throughout our state, I'm all too familiar with white supremacy in that form. As it relates to employment opportunities, African Americans are not getting the same opportunities. I remember working for Walmart and having more experience, more education than many, or shall I say, almost all of my managers, but I didn't get the opportunity. And that's just not my experience. Unfortunately, that is the experience of many African Americans. As it relates to education, graduating from the University of Arkansas, and extremely proud to be a University of Arkansas graduate. But in the counseling program, myself and two other Black men experienced hardships. I was unable to complete the program, and these other two gentlemen, they were able to complete the program, but they were met with many challenges, unlike our white counterparts. Unfortunately, that story continues today because this summer, Black at UARK was tweeting. And it was tweeting because it is a very harsh and painful reality for African Americans. When we look at healthcare, African Americans are concerned about being vaccinated. And we think of what comes to mind, the Tuskegee experiment. And then there are so many other examples of how African American women have been misdiagnosed or not receiving the same diagnosis as white women. Same with Black men. So in every aspect of life, we have been impacted by white supremacy. What's interesting about white supremacy, a lot of people don't quite understand white supremacy. They look at white supremacy as the KKK. They look at blatant acts of racism. They don't look at the things that I've described. And I believe a large portion of that can be contributed to lack of understanding, awareness, and choosing not to engage, choosing not to get in close proximity. In order for us to change anything, we have to be in close proximity. And having empathy. And Lowell, I think that it's really hard to have empathy when you don't understand that individual's experience. But it's one thing to not understand it, but to tell me that it's not that bad, to tell me that, to attempt to justify it. So in my work here in Fayetteville and throughout the state, advocating for Black Lives Matter has been very interesting. And here in a second, I will explain how that looked as I ran for office. But to your first point, personally, being impacted by white supremacy, continuing to be impacted by white supremacy today as it relates to lack of opportunities. I have 4 college degrees, And I'm very thankful for my education. I'm very thankful for my experience. However, there have been numerous times where I did not get jobs. And I don't think it was necessary because of my education. I believe that it was because of the color of my skin. I remember last year, I interviewed for a position and as a social worker, and I was denied the opportunity. And when I reached out to the individual who interviewed me, they responded, well, we wanted someone who spoke, who was bilingual. Two things that was not a part of the job requirement. And nobody asked me if I could, if I were bilingual. That was very frustrating. And even myself, a longtime activist, um, the past 5 to 6 years devoted a vast majority of my life to teaching others about racial justice, having to experience that, feeling powerless, feeling hopeless, because we can change so many things about ourselves, but we can't change our race. There's nothing I can do about that. This is who I was born Black. I'm born African American. And many times my experience, and unfortunately the experience of so many other people, we are denied opportunity because of that. Um, Race is very complex. White supremacy is very complex. But it is definitely every African American that I know. And of course, Lowell, I don't speak for every African American, but I can say this. Research affirms that African Americans are not, don't have the same opportunities. You spelled it out for us right before we started this conversation, and you and I have talked about that numerous times, and that's why we are here today. So that can't be denied. But what are we going to do? Are we going to continue the conversations, or will these conversations lead to action? As an African American man, I'm tired, I'm frustrated. I keep singing the same song, but I feel it's a different verse. I keep preaching the same message. I keep motivating. I continue to build awareness, but I'm still impacted by white supremacy. And it, even individuals like myself and other African American leaders, we become very, very, it wears you down because you're not wanting extra, any special treatment. You're just wanting equity. You're just wanting your life to matter. So, yes, personally, I have been impacted by white supremacy. And those are a few examples. Throughout my life, I'm 47 years old, and growing up, I experienced numerous encounters, personal encounters, and it made me question who I was. It impacts your self esteem because I left asking myself, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? You see, I was told by my grandparents, go to college, get your education, speak properly, be very nice, articulate, be very friendly, wear, dress well, wear a tie, do everything that white America has told us to do to get ahead. Lowell, I did that, and it did make a difference. White supremacy continued to impact me. One of the things that I discovered personally, white people have an image of black people, and that's something that's not a secret. I didn't necessarily, me personally, I didn't fit that description. Being educated, articulate, well-dressed. That I learned that made white people uncomfortable because I didn't fit that narrative of lazy, uneducated thug. Therefore, I became a threat because my behavior wasn't predictable and it was foreign. It made many people uncomfortable. So I believe that many of my opportunities were lost because of that. I remember being referred to, Lowell, as a well-educated or uppity nigger. I remember that conversation, and that hurt because the only thing that I wanted my life to do, the only thing that I wanted to do was matter. I wanted the same opportunities as everyone else. But because the power, those in control were the gatekeepers of white supremacy, and because I didn't fit what they thought that their perspective or perception of a Black man, I didn't get the opportunity because they didn't know. I mean, it was like, wait a minute now, the Black men that we know, none of them talk like this, or none of them act like this, or they don't present themselves in this manner. So it's kind of like, and due to lack of a better example or phrase, damned if you do and damned if you don't. Because you're put in a situation you don't know what to do. Me personally, I remained who I am, being committed to being myself. So I think that for the most part, Lowell, I think that sums it up as it relates to personally. And I hope that you were able to grasp white supremacy's personal impact. I hope those listening are able to grasp those examples of my reality. Listening to this story, many white people are like, oh my God, it sounds horrible. Indeed, it sounds horrible, but that's been my reality. And that is the reality of so many other African Americans. And of course, that's something that's made public. I mean, the research, it's public knowledge. Politically, you're right. Black representation is it's few. I mean, there are few Black representatives. I am the second African American to serve on the Fayetteville City Council. It's been, I believe, 25, maybe 27 years. And there's a reason for that. But however, I'm there and I'm very thankful for the opportunity because representation matters. When we think in terms of policy change, the policies that are implemented have proven to have a more adverse impact on African Americans. My presence at the table, when Black leadership shows up, those policies change. Representation matters as it relates to the housing crisis and making sure that African Americans have access to programs to obtain quality and affordable housing. Employment opportunities. My representation reflects equity, making sure that resources are readily available and accessible to the individuals who need those resources the most. And unfortunately, in most cases, after that group, of course, African Americans are a part of that group or leading that group. So as I run for city council, it was very interesting, Lowell, very interesting. When you speak of white supremacy, I saw it from both perspectives. I saw the traditional, what we call, or what many refer to as your Trump supporters, ultra conservative, and there's nothing wrong with being conservative, let me say that. But when your conservative belief is rooted in white supremacy, that is a problem. So I experienced that. Individuals questioning my character because of, as I mentioned, my background, and my background was sealed and taken care of, and I did everything that I could to make sure that I was eligible to run and represent. Questioning some of my past financial challenges, which when I checked, filing bankruptcy, and I'm being very, very transparent, Bull, because I think this is really going to help you and those listening. I'm filing bankruptcies because of the reason that most people do. It's interesting how my filing bankruptcy was brought up as an ethical issue, but I see many of my white counterparts doing the exact same thing. But nothing was said about that. In spite of my public service, the only candidate on the ballot who has showed up for Fayetteville in many ways, and not just Black justice, as they called it, working with the police department during Black Lives Matter, during the protest, serving on the Civil Rights Commission as chair, being appointed by the mayor, leading his African American Advisory Council, Fayetteville Civil Service Commission, working for the homeless, state boards and commissions over the past since 2012, I showed up. Putting in the work, and not to run for public office, but because that feeds my soul. And I do believe that that is what I've been put on this earth to do, to make a difference. Let's ignore that. Let's ignore my record. Let's ignore my education. On that ballot, out of those running against me, I stood out as it relates to education. I've represented everyone in Fayetteville and made sure that everyone in Fayetteville was treated with the utmost respect and dignity in my various roles and commissions. Having a master's degree in social work and working in the field, I understand the problems of the marginalized. So everything that anybody can think of as it relates to a good city council candidate, I believe I had that in some, but it didn't matter. I had one thing, and that was I was Black. So I experienced that. And the other really interesting part is there was another group who felt like they believed Black Lives Matter. They were at the microphone cheering Black Lives Matter. Lowell, I started the Black Lives Matter movement in Fayetteville. However, I did it a little differently. I also created an opportunity to build relationships with allies, because we can't talk about racial justice without everyone being at the table, including the police. And those individuals were extremely, extremely unkind. And I get that, because this is politics. I understand that. But to question, to say that you support Black Lives Matter, but the man who started Black Lives Matter in Fayetteville, in Northwest Arkansas, my record of justice, you're going to run a white candidate, but you say that Black Lives Matter. So if you believe that Black Lives Matter, then you believe that Black representation is important, right? But I learned that Black Lives Matter only if I can control those Black lives. Black Lives Matter only if they don't want political power, or if their political power doesn't submit to my philosophy, or if it's not conducive to what I want. So here I am in the middle. I'm dealing with white supremacy, because that's what I call it. Dr. King warned us about that. And it was very frustrating, because the first group, I understood where they were coming from. And I had a strategy. But the second group, individuals who swore that they believed that Black Lives Matter and that they you thought would have your back, but I wasn't the Black candidate that they wanted for various reasons. They supported someone who was white. And that's if that's your political belief, that's if that's your preference, that's your preference. But if you say that you believe that Black lives matter and you believe in Black representation, that's a no-brainer. But I went through that, and that was very hard for me. So I said all of that to say this. Being an African American elected official is challenging because you have to literally be all things to all people. And I'm very thankful that during that time, the Black community was very, very, very supportive. I never complained campaigning. I continued to remain focused because my representation on the city council was too important to get caught up in foolishness. So I remained focused. I spoke to other African American candidates. They were experiencing the same challenge. The control of white supremacy. You have this element of, I don't believe that racism is a problem, and we don't talk about racism. I'm going to make sure that who are totally against Black Lives Matter. But then you have this group, as I described, oh, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But then you get a Black candidate because of whatever reason you don't agree with him. So you try to destroy this Black candidate, but you believe Black representation matters. And I'm asking, do you believe that Black Lives Matter? Well, yes. Well, do you believe that Black representation matters? Well, of course. Well, why are you against Black candidates? Nobody anything. It was tough. Being in office now, I have the opportunity, and I call it a privilege, to represent everyone. But I know that I'm there for many reasons. One reason is to make sure that the perspective of a group of people who have not experienced representation, that their perspective is made known and that they truly matter. Because if you're going to say that Black lives matter, then you have to make sure that African Americans have a seat at the table. And not only a seat at the table, but a voice at the table. And even the ability to lead the table. And one of the things about white supremacy, and this is what I've told white people, you can't have it both ways. You can't say Black lives matter, but control Black lives, because that's hypocritical. It doesn't work like that. Empowering Black people to serve and to lead, that's what the call to action is. Looking around the table and saying, you know what? Because I believe that Black lives matter, I'm going to be intentional and deliberate as relates to making sure that we have Black representation. And I'm not going to create any barriers as relates to that being done. And I'm going to give up my time, my resources, and my talents to make sure that that happens. We can say what we want to say all day, but the proof is in our actions. And my election to city council clarified or proved many different things. It proved that we're not as progressive as we say we are. Progressiveness is just not based on defunding the police. Being progressive is based on listening to Black leadership, giving them the opportunity to lead, especially when they've proven that they're qualified. When you've seen their work and when you understand, more importantly, that Black folks need a voice and seat at the table, and the way to dismantle white supremacy is helping Black people build political power. And after my election, I was a little mentally drained. Very grateful to win, but I was mentally drained. I am a believer. And I remember Thanksgiving. I was praying, and I remember, just in prayer, being so confident that I was going to win. And in my mind, just my spirit, I was rejoicing and, thinking, God, I give you the glory and the thanks you made this happen. And I'm still at that moment. I'm very thankful every day, but mentally, I was tired because as a Black candidate, what I experienced, particularly in a community that prides itself on being progressive. One thing that I've learned throughout this process, I'm the city councilman for everybody in Ward 1, whether they voted for me or not. And I have to act as such. So I can't, what happened to me personally while I was, as I campaigned, that does not impact my decision. As an African-American man, my voice and my representation is so important. I don't get the opportunity to participate in choosing political sides. I'm going to do what's right. I have to forge relationships in the manner that's going to move Fayetteville forward, that's going to be beneficial to the Black community. I can't use my position as a council member because I have an axe to grind with someone. I have to do the right thing because improving the quality of life for African Americans, part of that is contingent upon how I represent. So I have to be very careful and make sure that I do the right thing because we may never get this opportunity again. And my ancestors, in the way that they would have me, the way they reacted to these challenges, very positive, in the spirit of Jesus, loving thy neighbor, loving those who crucify us, loving those who misuse us. I think that's part of it. And for myself during this campaign and afterwards, that's what I'm having to do. And because again, I can't risk doing anything else. I have an opportunity to make a big impact through legislation, through policy change right here in Fayetteville. I have come with an agenda, and that is to leave our community in a much better place than which I found it, particularly for certain people. Because when African Americans have access to resources, the entire community thrives. And I want to make sure that that is a reality. And as far as my leadership, I have encouraged many African Americans to serve on boards and commissions, and that has happened. Housing Authority, Civil Service Commission. We are seeing more and more African Americans serve in these roles. I had a conversation with Chief Reynolds, and I believe 7 African Americans have been hired, looking at Fayetteville and looking to see something that was never done and renaming that street after Coach Nolan Richardson, listening to Black voices. After that, I could hear Black people saying, Fayetteville's changing. Black people have now reached out to me concerning opportunities in Fayetteville. I had a conversation with someone yesterday about an opportunity. My leadership has opened the door for many African Americans to feel like, yes, I can do this. There's someone there cheering for me. There's someone that's going to help me, someone that's going to guide me, someone's there to advise me. And because of that, our community will be impacted. But that only comes through Black leadership. And I believe that we have had a very progressive city council. But I'll just say this, being a well-meaning white person is not the same as an impacted Black person. And there's no other way to put it. And I appreciate allies and those who voted for me in Fayetteville. I really appreciate the opportunity to eventually win some conservative voters, and the other group I described eventually at some point, they came together to support me. I appreciate that. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that, because that's very important. But as it relates to the impact, the struggle was and remains to be real.
DeAndre, thank you so much for sharing so powerfully, personally with me, with us. Really appreciate your vulnerability and willingness to speak the truth. You alluded to Jesus, who told us that the truth sets us free. And so I appreciate your willingness to speak the truth and to do so in love. So I've learned a lot today, DeAndre, and I'm sure that our audience has too. So as we close, thank you for taking the time for being with us today. You and I will discuss how other folks can connect with you, perhaps on the internet, and we'll post some relevant links so that people can continue to follow you. Perhaps folks who've not seen your face before today in this conversation who would like to continue to get to know you and your work. So anything that you would like to say in closing before we end today's conversation, DeAndre?
Lowell, again, thank you so much for making yourself vulnerable. As we address white supremacy, again, I say this time and time again, it's a tough conversation. And imagine having to give up something or a part of something or share something that you really didn't earn, but you benefit from. And when white people are able to have that conversation, to seriously think about it, to seriously have that conversation, because you benefit from it, that your entire life in every system, but to make yourselves vulnerable to it. Thank you. I do believe that, that God is pleased when we fight for justice, when we have mercy on others. We are all his children. And there's a song that says, Jesus loves the little children, every color. And that's the commitment. That should be our commitment. We don't get to pick and choose. And we have an opportunity right here. The work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, you described other groups in Fayetteville, the work that they're doing. In order to be like Jesus, in order to love every color, every race, and to embrace and to treat everyone with dignity and respect, to do mercy, to work towards mercy and justice. There's an opportunity to participate in a conversation and then find something to do. We all can't do the same thing, but there's a role for everyone to play as it relates to dismantling white supremacy. And I don't know every role, but I do know that action is required, some form of action. So I would like to encourage those listening today to make yourselves vulnerable, like Lowell and so many others. Open your heart, open your mind, be empathetic, and the rest will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, DeAndre.